Now, a video that circulated on social media recently caused an uproar after police officers were seen manhandling a learner in Krugersdorp before bundling her into a vehicle. This has renewed the debate on whether law enforcement officers are always brought to book for their offences. Policemen have been accused of nearly 1,000 rapes since 2012. A new investigation by Viewfinder has found that many of them abuse the authority to aid in crimes. To talk more about this, we're joined by Viewfinder editor, Mr. Daneel Knoetze, as well as the Deputy General Secretary of the South African Police Union, Mr. Peter Ntsime. Gentlemen, a very good evening to you. Perhaps let me start with you, Ndate Ntsime. You must have seen that video that made the rounds last week on social media. And one of the irregularities that was noted there is that one of the police officers was actually wearing a balaclava. So not only was there no sort of identification, but there was an effort to actually disguise or shield himself from being identified. Can you comment on that, as well as the irregularities of that particular act?
No, thank you, and good evening to our viewers. Indeed, we saw the video, though what is being stated on the media, we do not have facts into what really happened and what transpired prior to those police officers arresting that young lady. In terms of the balaclava, you must understand that currently we have a situation of COVID. We do not know why he was not wearing the police mask. The police, you will see most of them when they're in uniform. There is a police mask that most of our police officers are wearing as a form of identification. And outside that, they can use the surgical mask. We saw the video, but police officers were in uniform. Of course, it was during the course of the day. We do not think that it was a question of shielding the face, but it was more a question of one having a mask as a mandatory in this country to have a mask at all times.
Can I ask you this, Ntsime, before we move forward? Yes, it is COVID era and guaranteed everybody must wear a mask. But balaclavas, do people wear balaclavas as opposed to masks, and specifically police officers? Does that not sound like an excuse?
No, like I'm saying that the police itself, they have their own mask with police names, SAPS, and emblem on the side. Police officers are not allowed to wear the balaclavas. You have to wear a mask that have the police insignia. And if you do not have that, of course, you are expected to have an ordinary mask, your surgical mask. I'm not condoning the fact that one must have a balaclava, because obviously you'll see most of the police officers now wearing the balaclavas. We cannot say that is correct. It is not correct.
One of the other things that we've noticed as well is that that particular vehicle is unmarked.
Of course, police officers, they have marked and unmarked motor vehicles. It is known almost everywhere, all the police stations. In the absence of marked vehicles, your police will have to have the resources that are available. And most of these vehicles, you find that they are not marked. In the police environment, those who are not on uniform, those who are called a detective, they don't use the marked vehicle. Those who are on uniform, they use the marked vehicle. But when the police, those who are using uniform or who are on uniform, do not have sufficient resources like cars that are marked, they have to use state vehicles. So what we can confirm is that that is a state vehicle. It's not a marked vehicle, it's a state vehicle. And police officers, ordinarily, they use this vehicle to do crime prevention and crime detection.
We'll come back to that particular issue in just a moment, but let me introduce you, Mr. Knoetze, into this conversation. You, as Viewfinder, have done some investigations and analysis on police and crimes. Tell us about the links that you have found in your research.
Certainly. Thank you so much for having me. So we at Viewfinder have been doing a data-driven investigation based on the Independent Police Investigative Directorate, which is the police watchdog in South Africa, which keeps meticulous records on complaints against police officers in the country, dating back to 2012. The database has been the inspiration for the investigation. And what we found is that every year in South Africa, police officers stand accused of thousands of non-fatal acts allegations of misuse of force related to assaults, shootings, and torture, hundreds of instances of killings, and scores of rapes, including a third of the rapes registered against police officers allegedly being against on-duty officers. That's the first instance. What that data tells us, if you look at it more closely, if you read the complaint descriptions, is that there's a systemic abuse of power and authority that runs as a thread through many of these complaints, or at least the allegations that are leveled. That's not to say that all police officers, many police officers in this country are involved in that. The vast majority of police officers are certainly upstanding and serve the communities that they are in well. I'm certain of that. But it does speak to a problem in terms of a permeation of the use of force within the police service by a select few individuals. The second thing that data tells us is that there's systemic non-accountability. In fewer than 1 in 100 of these cases that are registered against police officers, the SAPS actually moves to dismiss an officer after a departmental hearing. The reasons for that are complex. IPID is under-resourced as the police watchdog, but we've also found a reluctance across the board in police management to act on IPID findings and recommendations against its own officers, and that many of these cases result in rubber stamping through disciplinary and departmental processes, and very few of them actually translate into proper accountability. The discussion around the criminal justice system and the courts and how many of these police officers are convicted and sent to prison is a discussion for another day. Our focus at the moment is predominantly on police management and the lack that we found of political will to enact discipline and command and control appropriately through the institution of the police.
Mr. Ntsime, I'd like to go back to this video, and I think it is still very important to say that investigations are still underway, that the details of exactly what transpired before the snippet that we are seeing, that we do not have those details as yet. But what will go into investigating a scenario such as the one that we are seeing now?
Look, point number one, as South African Policing Union, we need to be clear, and we've been consistent on this matter that we are not going to condone police brutality at all, or any abuse of power by either our members or members of the South African Police Service. When you look into the video, we need to be very clear. That video, you can see that police officers are dragging that young lady. They are putting her in the police vehicle, and she's screaming, of course, she's resisting that. It is an arrest that must be effected. If in fact the police officers can give a better explanation what was the reason for arrest, and that reason is accepted by the police management, to us is an arrest up until we know what was the reason the police officer put her in the police vehicle. There is no, the outcry currently what we see is an abuse of power, is as if that the young lady was assaulted. But in that video that we saw, she was in fact taken into police vehicle. So from where we seated, even though we do not have the preliminary investigation on this matter, we see police officers arresting a young lady. We hear it on the media now that it was a question of a mask, that she was not wearing a mask. We're waiting for the feedback from the police management on the matter.
Mr. Knoetze, talk to us about, you spoke about the lack of accountability. You also spoke about the number of cases where police are actually dismissed or disciplined after such, such cases are seen and experienced. Talk to us about a specific case where a young woman was basically taken by a police officer, was raped by that particular police officer. The police officer was then went through the entire legal system, was sentenced to, I think, 10 years in imprisonment, but actually was out after a few weeks.
Yes, so the case you're referring to happened outside Piet Retief in Mpumalanga in 2014. It is the case study that we elevated and chose to illustrate what we believe is a systemic lack of accountability within the police service. It's very rare for a police officer to have been convicted and sentenced to prison, which happened in this instance. But the point that we made in this case was that even though there was an extremely strong prima facie case against this individual police officer, there was no feedback recorded in IPID's monitoring of that case from police management that a disciplinary had been initiated concluded and that an appropriate sanction had been meted out. It appears from the available data and records on this case publicly that that police management deferred their responsibility to the courts. We know that the courts are systemically unable to deal with rape cases on a regular basis. Police Minister Becky Cele recently announced that there's a forensic science lab backlog of cases in excess of 200,000. Many of those are gender-based violence and rape cases. So this is not just an issue with the courts that affects police officers, but it affects the criminal justice system as a whole. And in that scenario, we would hold our investigation shows, and what we know about police oversight in this country dictates that police management have a due responsibility to ensure discipline within its ranks for these very, very serious cases of criminality and misconduct that are reported. In that instance,
let me bring in Mr. Ntsime here. Mr. Ntsime, what are the measures that are put in place to discipline police officers who are found guilty of misconduct or abuse of power?
Okay, thank you. Look, firstly, let me just be clear that I'm not speaking on behalf of the South African Police Service, but rather on behalf of the South African Policing Union. But there are measures that are in place. Firstly, when there is a criminal case that is open against any member of the police, Section 206 of the Constitution allows the IPID to conduct investigation because they do the oversight over the police, investigation against members of SAPS or metros. So they will then have a recommendation that must be submitted to the SAPS management. On the basis of that recommendation, if there is any tribunal, like any other person, any other worker in this country, there must be a tribunal, there must be an investigation, and if there is anything that warrants a trial, then that person will have to go and into a tribunal. Evidence must be laid on balance of probabilities, and if the person is found guilty, the member will have a relevant sanction on the matter. If the member is not found guilty, then the member must go back to work. So there are measures in the police, and currently this is our understanding. The independent investigation will be done by IPID in terms of Criminal Procedure Act, and internal investigation will be done by the police management, and members are always, if there is a case, are always being dragged into the tribunal, what we call a disciplinary hearing in the police environment.
And what is the extent of police members with crime records?
Look, the point number one you need to understand, gender-based violence is a serious challenge in this country, not only in the police, but in the country as a whole. What we do as the members of the South African Police Union, or as a union itself, we always encourage our members not to conduct themselves in any misconduct or to find themselves in the other side of the law. Because you must understand that, like my colleague have just stated here, this is a question of trust. It's a question of power over the other. So our members are entrusted with protecting in particular, women and children in this country. So our expectation is that our members will do everything within the ambit of the law. And if there is any transgression, investigation must be conducted independently. So, and then if a member is found to be guilty, then reasonable steps must be taken against that particular member.
Gentlemen, I thank you very much for your time. As we have said before, that investigation regarding that particular video is still ongoing. Thank you very much for your time this evening.